Welcome to Creative Moves, Left Career, Right Path, the show where we're in conversation with someone who made their mark in their chosen profession before stepping away from that career to pursue something entirely different. We start by diving into what drove their initial success, hearing about the highs and challenges of their first career, to the moment they realised it was time for a change, and how they made the transition into their current role. My name's Kabir, and today I'm talking to Emma Puddick, a full-time potter. Emma, hi.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Nice to speak to you. It's been a while.
It has been a while. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about what you've been up to and how things have changed for you since we last spoke. What would be great is if you could talk us through your first career, if you like, how you got the job and what you were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first career was in TV production, mostly in on-air creative and broadcast. And I came to that. I went to university to study radio, film and television with an idea that I wanted to work in a creative field and work in the media. And whilst I was at university, I studied stop motion animation. So when I left, I really wanted to be a stop motion animator. And I got a job working on a stop motion series as a production assistant, which was a really great first job. It was a really lovely series. It was a preschool series that went on CBeebies and Playhouse Disney and things like that. And we had sort of everything in-house, from the pre-production to the actual animating and the post-production. That ran for a couple of series. So I worked there for a couple of years. And then, because that was kind of a rolling contract, I needed another job because I'm in my early 20s, had a lot of student debt, couldn't really kind of move in a freelance way at that point. So I was looking for jobs. And I happened to come across the advert for a production assistant at Discovery. And that's the first I knew about on-air promotions and on-air creative.
For our audience, would you mind explaining what on-air creative is?
Yeah, the way I always explain it to, my mum and stuff, is it's all the things that you see on a TV channel that aren't an advert or a programme.
Right.
So it's the branding, the idents, the promos, the trailers for things, the continuity, menus and voiceover, just the general look and feel of the channel. I kind of worked through a few jobs, working from production coordinator to production manager, and then ended up as a sort of production lead. I took a little detour after redundancy to go and train to be a teacher. And I taught media and film studies at GCSE and A-level. And then I came back to on-air creative and did that for a couple more years before leaving London and moving to Bristol, where I started working in an in-house creative team. And then I got a job at a video marketing agency in the centre of Bristol.
And so just going back to Discovery, how long were you working there for? You said you left there to go into teaching. So I just wondered, were you working at Discovery the whole time?
I had a fixed term contract at Discovery.
Right.
So I was there for about 18 months or 2 years.
Right.
And then we were constantly kind of hoping that HR would extend that contract.
Right.
And I left because it wasn't extended. And I went to Fox International Channels, where I worked on the FX channel. This is 20 years ago now, which is a bit crazy.
Yeah.
And I was there for 10 months before I was able to come back to Discovery to a job at Animal Planet. I worked on the smaller channel brands that were coming through. So that included Animal Planet, TLC. Oh, goodness, I can't remember them all now. But, we ended up working on about half a dozen different channels at the time.
And you mentioned that you left that profession to go into teaching.
Yeah, so that was 2011. So I think, I've been in that, in the on-air promotions kind of at Discovery and stuff for about 7 or 8 years. And there was another round of restructuring and redundancies that I actually kind of left at that time. And I was really keen to try working with young people and teaching, basically, kind of giving something back. So I went into working in a school as the creative media assistant, and I also had a role as the online systems developer.
Right.
So I worked in the IT department and unblocked a lot of photocopies and stuff. And I did that for a year whilst I was applying to get onto the training scheme, which was called the Graduate Teacher Programme. So that gave you a role as an unqualified teacher working in a school whilst you went to university for a day a week for a year.
Right.
And that led to qualified teacher status. So I worked in that school for a year as the assistant and then a year as the unqualified teacher whilst I was training. And then I got to the end of that year, and because of no funding for the salary to continue, I had to find a job. So I got a job at a different school and sort of started there as an NQT.
And NQT, that's newly qualified teacher.
Yeah, newly qualified teacher. It was a huge kind of stress that caused a bit of a kind of issue with my mental health. And I had to kind of make a decision at that point, what was possible for me to kind of be well and also, earn a living. I really love teaching, and I hope I was good at it. I mean, I sort of got an outstanding grade on my qualified teacher status, But teaching as a job is really, really difficult.
So then you went back to TV. How was that going back like for you?
Oh, like slipping into a warm old coat. No, we often kind of say like, oh, it's really hard, long hours in TV.
Yeah.
And then I went and tried really hard, long hours. So coming back, it was like, this is brilliant.
I also wonder, did you bring, or you must have, and what, do you remember what skills you learnt when you were teaching? Did you bring that into your role when you went back into working in TV? Or was there anything that helped you that you learned about yourself maybe?
One of the things that's really changed over the years, whether it's just from experience of work in different roles or aging or whatever, is when I was sort of earlier in my career, I'd really struggle with the plan changing, deviating from the plan. Like, I've done the work to make the plan, guys. Now we're all going to stick to the plan.
Yeah.
And I think I definitely was much more flexible and much more accepting of things changing and adapting to them by the time I was at Red Bee.
Right.
And I think as well, so I was kind of line managing a few people, and obviously teaching and managing people isn't the same thing, but having an understanding of, I think, very much setting expectations. I don't mean setting expectations in terms of I am telling you this is what you need to do, and if you don't do it, then woe betide you, kind of thing. I mean, when I was teaching, I was very much trying to empower students by giving them frameworks and mark schemes and understanding of, like, you're not just going into an exam just for the hell of it, just, for them to trip you up. Like, they're trying to see you demonstrate these skills, and these are the ways that you can demonstrate these skills. And I think bringing that into kind of line managing people is not obviously setting frameworks and mark schemes, but being able to kind of point out, like, ask people what they want, where are they wanting to go, how do they want to get there, as well as just being in this role, what's your kind of overall kind of aim? Yeah. How are you going to improve those skills or demonstrate those skills and, empower people to move forward, and just kind of coaching people more, I think.
Sounds to me like you had a heightened duty of care when you moved back into TV that I can imagine you would have developed in teaching, which is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, possibly.
Whereby there's an understanding that, because when you manage people, you can take on various different ways of doing it. You can be quite dictatorial, or, I say it's this way, but that doesn't necessarily get you what you want. And sounds like you were, to me anyway, from what you're saying, it sounds like you were bringing in a much more pastoral way of working with your team that maybe you learnt from teaching, or maybe that's why you taught? Because I always think that teaching is vocational anyway. I don't think people go into that for the money.
No, they don't go in it for the money.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's because they've got that sort of ethos or mindset that they want to help people.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It's really interesting to hear your take on it.
So then when you left Red Bee,
So it was a maternity cover contract that I had at Red Bee, and it was a maternity cover contract that I had at Sky as well. So it was kind of coming to the end of the maternity cover at Red Bee. There was sort of a hope that they could move me into a different role. And then I was sort of contacted about this role at Sky. And so at Sky, I was senior manager promos. So I actually managed a team of production managers who also had line management responsibility for production coordinators. And that, again, was very much working with marketing teams and managing that sort of internal commercial arrangement and contract, and looking at workflow a lot, looking at how to kind of get the process working smoothly, how to kind of get the briefs in properly, how to make sure that marketing were getting what they wanted and things were efficient and kind of value for money, working with internal resource and some external resource. And again, yeah, a lot of it, I suppose, was about coaching and mentoring that team. You know, I was fortunate that I was able to do some management training at Sky that was accredited by the Institute of Leadership and Management. That's one for the CV.
Yes.
And, you know, I encouraged the production managers who were also line managers in my team to also, you know, take that course and kind of get that sort of upskilling and understanding of how to manage people. And I think it was a really crucial thing to kind of get the team working well, was to actually kind of make sure that everyone was empowered and managing the relationships within it.
Yeah. Because,
you know, I wasn't going to line manage the production coordinators directly. But there was sort of we needed to do some clarifying around job descriptions and roles and what was expected of people and how we worked with the creatives and that sort of thing. And I think the teaching experience really did kind of help when I was sort of bringing everyone on board and kind of getting some meetings together to kind of go through those things and kind of give people agency in it, and kind of make it sort of at least feel like a team decision about what we all did.
Sure.
So, it was an interesting time at Sky in terms of the people in Sky Creative I worked with were great, and I learnt a lot. But again, there was another kind of change in for me in terms of where I was working, in that previously in On-Air Creative, I'd felt very much like the point of our role was to get people to watch the channel and watch the programmes, and the way that your success was measured was by, did those programmes rate? Did you win awards and that sort of thing? And what I really kind of understood at Sky is that you were selling a product. It was a commercial product. Really, the overall thing that they're selling there is subscriptions. And because we worked on things like the box sets and the Sky Store and those more commercial areas of the promos, it became more clear to me that actually we're working in a business. It's a commercial proposition. Maybe I'd been kind of labouring under the misapprehension that we're all having like a lovely creative time making things for the love of it.
So was it after Sky that you moved to Bristol?
Yes, yeah, I moved to Bristol in 2016.
And did you make that decision because of work or just for personal reasons or a bit of both? So
that was, kind of one of the reasons that I trained to teach is because I didn't want to be tied to London forever.
Yeah.
And I had looked at moving to other areas and trying to kind of find work there. And it kind of came to a point where I was in my mid-30s. A lot of my friends were married, having children. moving kind of that little bit further out so they could own a house to raise those children in and that sort of thing. And it became very much, I felt quite isolated where I was, that it would take, you'd see your friends like once every few months and travel a couple of hours to see them and that sort of thing. And it just kind of felt like being in London didn't really serve me anymore.
Right.
And even though I was in a relatively well-paid job at Sky, I was living in, I'd bought a shared ownership flat in 2010. So I owned like 40% of a one-bed flat, and it had some difficulties in terms of dealing with the housing association and where I lived and the service charge spiralling and that kind of thing.
Right.
And I just wanted some really small things in life. I would like to have a house. I would like to have a cat, and I'd like to be able to follow my passion to make pottery more.
Yeah.
Because it's something that I'd done since I was sort of at school. And it was something that I did as evening classes sort of all through life. So I was like, I can't really do that in London.
Yeah.
Like, I can't see like where I need to get to in my career to have a job where I'm earning enough to be able to buy a small house. And how far out of London do I need to live to do that? And do I want to be a commuter that's travelling in? I grew up in Hampshire, and even kind of ended up looking kind of at my hometown, which is like, I don't know, 2.5 hours on the train into London. And the prices of houses there, a place that I categorically would not want to live, were way out of what I could ever expect to afford, because it was 2.5 hours out of London was basically a commuter town. And yeah, as I started looking at places that had a sort of self-contained industry, Brighton was somewhere that felt like a kind of place I could live, but because of the proximity to London, obviously is a bit of a commuter town as well, and didn't have such a kind of accessible, pre-set up in my eyes then, kind of media television kind of entity. So I kind of moved to Bristol. I had one friend here, and I happened to have heard that Dyson, who outside of Bristol in the Cotswolds, had an in-house film team, and happened to see a job advertised for a film producer on a 5-month contract. And so I up sticks. I'd come to the end of the maternity cover at Sky, so put my flat on the market, bought a car, found somewhere to rent, and in 3 weeks I had moved from London to Bristol and was commuting out into the Cotswolds to Dyson.
And did you go to uni in Bristol?
No, I went to university in Canterbury.
Oh, right. Okay. So you literally had one friend there, and you were like, that's
good enough for me.
So you were at Dyson for 5 months, or did that extend?
That extended. I was there probably for somewhere between 18 months and 2 years.
And then after that?
I'd been looking at jobs in the centre of Bristol, and I found a role at a small creative video marketing agency.
And what year was this?
So that was 2018.
And is that where you were until you made the change into what you're doing now?
Yeah.
So talk us through that. So obviously, presumably when you went to Bristol, you started learning to make pottery, or you were already making pottery to a certain level, or what stage were you at?
I'd started making pottery when I was like 16.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I did an A-level in ceramics.
Right, and so had you started working in pottery again when you moved to Bristol, outside of work?
One of the kind of key points about moving is to have more access to be able to do pottery. So I started going to evening classes in Bristol.
Yeah.
So I moved right at the end of 2016, and I bought my house in 2017. So I was in Bristol going to evening classes, working at Dyson. And then it was 2018 that I started renting a space in a shared pottery studio and started making things independently, like outside of an evening class. I mean, a big part of kind of getting the job in Bristol and cutting out that commuting time and everything was that I was able to kind of go to the studio on my way home from work, go in on the weekends. It was like 24/7 access, so I could go there at 3 o'clock in the morning if I wanted to. Don't think I ever did, but
So that's a pretty amazing change to your life, right? So you're in London working long hours, where or be it as a teacher or at Sky, etc. And now you're in your own home, in a house, in a place where you can also pick up the hobby that you loved and do it in the evenings and the weekends. That must have felt quite exhilarating.
yeah, it's funny kind of thinking back now that I kind of, like, you talk about living the dream, but, you know, literally my dream was like a little house with a little garden and a cat to be able to make pots. And very quickly, from kind of making that decision that I couldn't do it in London, I had those things. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
And what led you to become a full-time potter? How did that change happen?
Wow. How did these things happen? So I had the space in the shared studio and was working away there and working at the video marketing agency. Quite kind of early on, it was a really small business. I'd sort of taken on quite a lot. Our studio manager ended up off sick, so I kind of stepped up and sort of took over some of that kind of stuff, as well as producing and working with various clients and all of that kind of thing. And then, you know, we ended up kind of, it grew, it shrank kind of thing as we needed more freelancers and stuff, and we had a replacement studio manager and whatnot. So I was kind of working away there and also, you know, making my pots in my spare time. And so a few things happened in 2019. In the summer, I became quite unwell with my mental health and I needed to take some time off work. I was also working towards a group exhibition with the people in the shared studio. So, you know, there was a period in 2019 where I was basically getting out of bed to feed the cat and take my medication, or go to the studio to try and make this work for the exhibition, until such time as I kind of went back to work, which was supposed to be a staged return, but with many of those things, it was, you know, 1 week of 3 days a week, and then I was back full time.
Right.
And so after I'd been back for a couple of months rather, I kind of came to the conclusion that I want to try and do the pottery more. And I requested to go part-time in that job, which they were very accommodating and kind about. And it took a few months. So it didn't happen until February 2020 that we'd kind of made some changes, and I'd moved into what was called head of traffic. So that I was in a 3-day-a-week role that was more of a kind of general oversight and long-term kind of planning kind of role. So I'd done the exhibition towards the end of 2019. I'd also at that point bought my own pottery wheel and set that up in the conservatory at home. One of my main things when looking for a house is, does it have a garage or a conservatory or an outhouse of some description that I could eventually kind of set stuff up in. So I was then splitting my time pottery-wise between making things at home and then taking them into the studio to decorate them and fire them and all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, so in February 2020, I went down to 3 days a week. And in March 2020, we went into lockdown.
So were you furloughed?
I was furloughed during lockdown, yeah. That kind of continued for a few months until they made me redundant because, they didn't have the money to keep people on once the government kind of funding for furlough went away. But I was really fortunate to have that unfortunately, I'd gone down to 60% of my salary before I was furloughed. So I was getting 80% of that 60%. But it was a kind of, I mean, everyone's experience of lockdown is very different. It was a really terrible time in a lot of ways. But for me, I was quite fortunate in that I, just before lockdown, at the start of March, I'd found a second-hand kiln for sale, and I'd bought that kiln. So I was ready to set up everything at home.
Wow.
So that first lockdown, I was like buying a shed for the garden, and which everything was shut. So I was like having to deal with trade suppliers to try and like get, gravel to make a base to build the shed on. And I was getting electricity run to the end of the garden and stuff. So it was actually sort of towards the end of May 2020 that I had the kiln installed and I was kind of fully set up at home. But the freedom of being furloughed meant that I was able to kind of just work, just make work.
I was just going to ask you, probably to you sounds really simple, setting up a kiln, but what does that actually involve? Because it seems to me like a pretty massive undertaking.
It kind of, it does sound scary. It does sound scary. And I learned a lot
There's a lot of heat there.
Yeah. So for people who aren't kind of that kind of pottery minded, the kiln goes up to about 1,300 degrees centigrade. And it's a small kiln. It was 60 litres. So it could get a few shells. It's about 30 centimetres in diameter inside. So relatively small, but obviously gets up to a very hot temperature. And I had to learn a lot about what was needed. So obviously I needed a professional electrician, and I've learned a lot about kilowatts and amps and all of that kind of thing. And then when my electric shower in my bathroom went, I found that actually more electricity goes through something that has water in next to my head than goes into that kiln.
And what, so it's 30 centimetres in diameter. How is it free?
Inside.
Inside. Is it freestanding? Does it go on something? How?
Yeah, it's freestanding. It's on like a little, on little legs. It comes up to about waist height on me, so I guess like under a metre tall. And
presumably you have a lot of space, you need a lot of space free around it.
You should leave about a foot around it, yeah.
Right. And when you turn it on, does it take a certain amount of time to heat up and it cools down over a certain amount of time, or is it always on? Yeah,
so you have what's called firing schedules in kilns. So you can choose, it kind of has a max amount of temperature that it can increase at a certain time, but you set what that is. So I would normally go up by 100 degrees an hour. So in 6 hours you would get to 600 degrees, and then increase that temperature a bit faster until you reach the temperature that you intend to. And on a glaze firing I'd go up by about 250 degrees an hour.
Wow.
So it would take sort of 6 to 8 hours depending on what kind of firing I was doing.
And how often would you fire it up?
Well, in the 3 years between setting that up at home and moving into a rented studio where I bought a much larger kiln, I fired it 300 times. Literally loading it up, firing it and unloading it, and then the next morning loading it up and firing it again.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. It got a lot of work.
Those of us that aren't potters, so we get a sort of an idea of the scale of it. How many, say, mugs, for example, could you? I don't know what you call it when you put it in the kiln and it comes out as a mug. I don't know what that's called. Fire?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I could fit 21 mugs into the glaze firing. So because I was making and selling about 100 a month, that's how come I was doing it so often. And you need to bisque fire, obviously, before you glaze fire. So I could fit 32. This is very precise because I had all of this kind of mapped out schedule. I could fit 32 in a bisque firing because they can touch each other.
Right.
So you can kind of pile them up more. And then in the glaze firing where they can't touch each other, I could get 21.
So glaze, obviously, I understand, is where you have almost like the varnish effect put on. What does bisque mean?
So bisque is where you turn clay into ceramic.
Right.
So clay, obviously, you know, it comes out of a bag, it's all muddy and wet.
Yeah.
Then you turn it into what you're going to turn it into.
Yeah.
You let it dry until it's bone dry, and then you put it into the kiln for bisque firing.
Right.
And that takes it up to about 1,000 degrees, and then that's going to make chemical changes in the structure of what clay is made of, which means that it is then ceramic material rather than clay. And that's called a bisque firing.
And that's interesting that you said that they can touch, the mugs can be touching when you go through that process, because I'd imagine you'd need them to be separated.
Yeah, in the bisque firing, they're just becoming solid. They're just becoming solid
Right.
clay. And clay, unless it gets to a much higher temperature, isn't going to melt and stick to each other.
Right.
So when you glaze things, you've put then a layer of further kind of oxides onto the oxides and clay onto the piece. And that goes to a higher temperature. And those then become basically glass.
Yeah.
So they become completely molten. And if that was touching something else, it's going to be molten, then sort of meld together, and as it cools, that becomes completely solid and you can't get it apart.
Right. And so did you learn that the process of doing this as you went, or had you learned some of it at your evening classes, or did you learn it when you went, okay, right, I'm going to buy a kiln, how the hell do I operate it, what do I do? Or did you already have an understanding of that from your classes that you were going to?
So in evening classes, you don't really learn a lot of the running of a studio technical stuff. You learn how to make things that you want to do for fun.
That's what I'm imagining, yeah.
I, in my time, have done ceramics as an A-level, and I also did a city in guilds, but they're very much kind of like, this is what clays are, this is how you can use glaze and slip and that kind of thing, and not really kind of the technical side of it. When I was a member of the studio, you would do an induction so that you could learn how to use the kilns and learn about the firing, and then you'd kind of get to a point where you would, because most of the kilns would be like a shared firing, you could then kind of assist the studio managers in loading a shared firing and how to kind of program the kiln and all that kind of thing.
Okay.
I mean, most of those kilns were older than me. So they all had their own idiosyncrasies. And then, yeah, I guess a lot of what I've kind of learned since then in terms of setting up a business and setting up a studio has been, I don't want to say self-taught, because I didn't teach myself. I found information and used it. There's a sort of a better word than self-taught, because a lot of people put the information out there, whether it's writing a book or putting it on YouTube or Instagram or something.
So what was the process from going from being at home? Did you build it gradually and then get to a point where you're like, right, now I feel confident, this is my business, this is what I do, I need my own studio?
So yes, I had the setup at home, which was very much like I had the space to make things. And as we mentioned before we started recording, the room that I'm in now, my box room, like single bedroom in my house, eventually became like a stock room and office space, because I hadn't really taken into account what happens after you've made it. So, I had the space to like make the stuff, fire the stuff, and then I had all these mugs all over my house, all these pots everywhere. So we ended up having to, sacrifice a room to it. And so in terms of building from just, pottering about into my shed to it being a business and a living, obviously I kind of started mostly in lockdown. My work first sold in the end of 2019 when I did the exhibition, the group exhibition. And at that point, I also set up a website, because it was a case of, well, we would need you to have business cards next to your stuff at the exhibition. And I kind of did some sums about whether I should start, say, an Etsy account, an Etsy page, or whether I should start my own web shop, and decided that probably my own was the way to go. So I built that myself through Squarespace, and sort of set up my own website and shop. And then sort of during 2020, obviously there weren't markets that ordinarily you might sort of start to sell handmade things at. So I kind of got involved in some online sort of Instagram local groups where I did sort of online markets and things like that. And in the summer of 2020, I joined a cooperative. It was a shop called Potter's in the centre of Bristol that ran for it was set up for about 25 years. It closed in 23 or 24. So that was a cooperative of about 25 potters or so. So you had a shop and you go and work in the shop like 6 or 8 days a year. And so that was a point of sale. I did some sort of wholesale, like with local independent shops, learned about how to kind of price my work and how things operate when other people are selling it.
And also I imagine how to negotiate when you're selling and also when you're buying, because they're two different skills.
Yeah. I mean, there's not really a lot of negotiating when it comes to commission in wholesale. Like, shops essentially charge 50%. So at that point, I'd sort of price my mugs at like £25. So if you buy a mug in a shop for £25, then the shop will take £12.50 and the person who made the mug will take £12.50. And that's fair enough. They're doing the work, they've got the overheads, they've got the staff, all of that kind of thing. But what I found was that I had developed a style that was very decorative, that was really labour intensive. Every time I try and come up with a design that's simpler, I just managed to make something that somehow was even more labour intensive for me. And so if I was to be earning a proper living from it and selling it wholesale, it would be a very expensive product for someone else to take 50% of it, or I would be really underpaying myself.
Presumably you do a limited run of each design.
Yeah, they're in limited numbers because of what I can make, but I would keep on making things until I choose to stop them. There are some designs that I've made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of.
Right. And I'm guessing that you learned all about website and social media and marketing in that respect as well yourself through doing.
Yeah, I think I brought a lot of my previous experience to it in terms of understanding what is engaging marketing, and understanding how to manage numbers and a budget. Obviously not necessarily in a product business kind of way, but in a general way. But yeah, I basically taught myself how to build a website on Squarespace. The website part is not so hard. It's the content in it. And I think the biggest thing is having good photography. So actually pulling in people who can take good photos has been a key kind of thing. And again, that's something that I need to develop at this point. I need to refresh a lot of that, and I need to find a good brand photographer to work with. I've learnt to take photos to the point that I can take product photos. So if there's a listing, I can take a relatively decent photo of the thing that you're going to buy. But I need more help in a kind of art-directed, styled, really branding kind of sense.
Right. And is it just you working for yourself at the moment, or do you have anyone to help you?
Yeah, it's me. My partner's helped me with, lugging stuff to markets and packing up boxes and that kind of thing. But when it comes to making things and everything, it's just me.
Right.
So you asked how I kind of got to the point of moving from home into another studio, and it is a case of through 2020 and 2021, things grew kind of steadily. I would say basically my revenues in 2020, I tripled them in 2021. And then in 2022, I tripled what I was taking in 2021. So 22 and 23 were really, really busy years. I was working my little fingers to the bone, almost literally. Because a really key thing for me to realise is it's a physical job. And even if I don't feel like I'm aching and exhausted at the end of a day's work, I have used an awful lot of energy, and it is really, really tiring. And I do need to consider how my body works, how my hands work, and how to kind of manage the well-being and longevity of that.
Be interesting to know, actually, Emma. Are there any skills that you feel that you developed in either of your previous careers that you've brought to your job now as a potter that you feel have helped you in a way that perhaps you wouldn't have benefited from if you hadn't had that experience?
Yeah, I think I've definitely brought skills from my previous roles into this. Not necessarily into how to make pots, that's kind of a completely separate thing. But in terms of the business and marketing side of things, I wouldn't have been able to make this a success without my previous experience. So when I first kind of was like, oh, do you think I could actually start selling pots from this being a hobby? I was like, oh, I'm not the best potter in the world. I'm not necessarily the best. I'm not the best potter in Bristol. I wasn't even the best potter in the shared studio, But it's not about that. I was like, the difference between me making this a success and other people is whether I do it. And also the thing that makes businesses a success or gives people the ability to turn their passion into a business is those other skills that come with it. I could make the best pots in the world, but if I don't know how to present them to people or tell people they exist or suggest that people might like to buy them, then I'm still just making pots in my shed for fun, which, to some extent I would love to do. But the key skills that I've kind of brought from my previous career that serve me the best is I do pretty much all of my marketing on Instagram. And when I was sort of in the pandemic and first really kind of starting, you just had to take a photograph. And that's a lot of what I did. It's kind of at the end of the day, about 7:00, I'd take a photograph of what I'd been doing and post it and write a bit about it. And over the years, Instagram has changed a lot and it's very much more video focused. And because I did a very practical degree in video production, and though my work was in the production side of things, I've done courses in editing, so I can use Final Cut and Premiere and that sort of thing. I know about frame rates and all these sorts of things, and they're very small details in the scheme of it, but it all kind of comes together to being able to technically make decent content and also have a decent looking website that makes people, that helps them to deliver that trust, that emotional connection with me as a brand. And I guess the other thing through working in on-air marketing is, we used to make campaigns all the time where you would plan out the launch of something, where you'd start with the coming soons and the teasers and the long leads, and then you'd kind of build up to the it's on tomorrow, it's on tonight. And I suppose I've kind of brought that to how I sell my work in a way. Because I was making really small runs of things to start with, or I had more demand than I could make. So it naturally moved to a place where as soon as I put things on my website, they would sell very quickly. Sometimes within a few minutes. And so I needed to point people to the time that they were going to be there. And it kind of came from quite a pure idea, if you like, of if you would like this, this is when you'll be able to get it. And then I was struggling that people were... I had a lot of sort of angry and upset comments and DMs and emails from people who weren't able to get something. So then I kind of organically had to bring in a lot of information about, like, here's the best way that you can get something. If you want to be able to buy from me, you need to make an account on my website. You need to set an alarm. You need to be there and you need to be refreshing the page and you need to do this. And then that becomes like a real event for people. And that kind of built up organically, but also from those kind of skills and previous experience that I had of working in marketing television.
Do you ever feel overwhelmed by social media? You mentioned direct messages early just then. Do you still get a lot of inquiries by direct messages, or people expecting you to go back to them with answers to questions? Does that take up much of your time?
Yeah, social media takes up an enormous amount of my time. And so when it comes to pricing work, I, many years ago, worked out an hourly rate based on the hours a week and therefore a year that I spend actually making things, because the rest of my time is spent marketing things. And so you need to include that into the cost of a product.
Yeah.
So it might just be a couple of quid's worth of mud and say an hour of my time, but that hour of my time is quite an expensive hour, because that hour is also matched by another hour or 2 hours of all the other things that I've done in order to get that mug to market, if you like. And it's quite challenging as a small business, and I think a lot of small sort of handmade businesses find it, that customers, and it's not something that I personally really have experience of, but it certainly is a bit of a trend, that customers engage with a small business or a sole trader in a different way than they do to a big business. And sometimes when I've had emails or DMs, I've thought to myself, like, if I was John Lewis and I was in the customer service team at John Lewis and this is a product they'd bought here, how would I deal with this? Or how would they expect me to deal with this? Or what do they expect from me? But yeah, on a more general kind of scale, people seem to understand when they buy from a large corporation that there are fulfillment departments, there are warehouses, there are website teams, and there are marketing teams and customer service teams, and people know that all of this exists in a big business. But when it exists in one person in a small business, it somehow, in certain people's eyes, can be less valuable and makes them question the price of a product.
Are you able to say log off at the end of a day and weekends? Are you able to switch off social media for yourself, or do you find yourself reacting or responding to messages in the evenings and at weekends as well?
So I think that is a really big challenge for me, because it's almost become a part of my behaviour over the last 5 years as things have progressed. So it very much started off that you must reply to every comment in a really timely way. You should respond to every DM. Instagram brought in sleep mode and things like that. So I have sleep mode on there. It's literally kind of bedtime. I don't stick to a 9 to 5 kind of thing, because making pots is actually a kind of all-consuming hands-on thing. You've probably noticed I take a while to respond to emails and things, because I'm not connected to a computer in the way that I was, and
Sure.
My hands are dirty a lot of the time, so I can't pick up my phone. So it does tend to happen in the evening. It does happen on the weekends. My partner works on weekends as well, so we don't kind of have set weekends. So I tend to work on the weekends. Part of moving from home into a separate studio was to kind of bring a bit more separation into my work. I mean, I needed the space, and I needed to get 3-phase electricity so that I could get a bigger kiln. So I can fit more than 21 mugs in the big kiln. But it was also getting my home back from work.
Yeah.
Like I say, I might have had a conservatory in a shed that was relatively shut off, but I could see that conservatory from my sofa.
Yeah.
I could see the work sitting there. I had, everything upstairs. I was literally packing orders and stacking boxes down my hallway, and, having the postman come to my house and everything. So having that separation has been better. I definitely, from that kind of, this all sort of starting in lockdown and being at home in lockdown, and I didn't have a routine that needed me to go out of the house. So I don't have kids that need to go to school, for instance. So I could literally get up and then find it was 3:00 and I was still in my pajamas, and I'd been in the shed and been making pots and hadn't spoken to anyone and all of that kind of thing. So it was definitely something that needed to happen for my general well-being to actually be out of the house and not be in a weird permanent lockdown of my own.
Yeah.
And then that kind of general social media work-life balance thing is something that definitely needs more work. So it's something that built organically, that's become almost habit. And I need to look at more, strategically, yes, but also setting things up in batches and almost having more office hours. Instagram has changed a lot in the last 18 months, I would say. I think because of events in the world, people maybe have a slightly different relationship with the tiny little screen in their hand that brings them all sorts of images, and maybe don't use it in the way that they did. Maybe I'm making, too broad a point there, but algorithms and people and behaviours change all the time. So there's less engagement, I would say. I feel like there's less, people comment less, they like less, there's much more consuming on Instagram particularly than there was engaging. So just kind of watching and scrolling. And
there's less engagement generally, or there's also less engagement with your social media activity?
I think there's less engagement with my activity, and I've extrapolated that to be a general point.
Yeah.
I think, and even in my own behaviour, it's, if I see a post that I'm like, oh yeah, cool, like I like I like what that post has to say, or I like this image, I don't then necessarily like it. And I don't feel like we necessarily have the same kind of social interactions that we would have done where you'd maybe leave a comment in the same way. I don't feel that people leave comments or have discussion with me as much as they used to, even though, I have a larger following and potentially more reach. And I mean, in that same kind of vein, reach and follower numbers don't necessarily equal sales.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, reaching more people is making more people aware of your brand and aware of your product, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, I have a post that has reached nearly 7 million people. I've got one that's reached over 5 million people, but the items that were in those posts aren't like flying off my shelves.
Right.
So yeah, it's weird.
It's just struck me talking to you, Emma, that it's, you are a sole trader in the purest sense, the most literal sense. Do you have any like business mentors or people that you get support from as a small business owner?
I wouldn't say mentors. I did a couple of years ago get a little bit of support from a sort of local government business scheme where I was able to kind of have some phone calls with someone, which did help in a way. They kind of gave me some useful tips in a sense that when I took on this new studio, I did a crowdfunder to buy this big new kiln, and I was sort of on the phone to this guy and said, "Oh, I'm doing this crowdfunder." And he sort of had a look and went, well, I can't see on your website that you're doing it. And that kind of made me think, I had like this little banner at the top that mentioned it. I had a blog post, I had my social media saying it and sending you here. But what I hadn't done was change my homepage and have like a whole like splash, like a complete website takeover, if you like, of this big event. So that was useful. But I mean, in terms of mentoring, I mean, there are certain groups and entities like the Design Trust and things that you can kind of get some, not support as such, but some tips and some information from. I really wish someone somewhere could just put together that, are you a potter who's going into business? Here's the T's and C's that you need to put on your website. Yeah. Here's a privacy policy you can use. Here's here's a template that's going to help you price your products properly. Here's information about whether or not you should be a limited company. All those kind of things that you really do need to kind of sort through that information yourself, even things like insurance. So when I started out, I had a membership to an arts association thing that you'd pay like £25 a year. And as part of that membership, you got public liability insurance. Yeah. So you could work in a shared studio and you could go to a little market and sell your things. And then when I moved and I had my home insurance for the fact that I had stuff in my house. Then when I moved over the road, I needed to get contents insurance. I needed to check that my public liability was still up to scratch. And it kind of wasn't, actually. I looked into whether I should get sort of income protection, which is way, way out of my price range. Yeah. I did get personal injury insurance, so if I ever get run over by a bus, I hopefully won't starve.
And also like professional indemnity, I imagine you have to have that as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's 2 questions that we ask everyone. The first one is, what's a decision that you would have made differently if you could go back in time and change the outcome?
I don't think that I would change any decisions I've made. I mean, and it's from a kind of, it's a long range benefit of hindsight thing, Maybe in 2014, I might have said, well, I should never have become a teacher because that's just wasted years of my career when I could have been climbing the ladder in, a different broadcaster or into an agency or something. Yeah. But I don't think that was a bad choice, and I don't think that was the wrong thing to do. And I don't think that any of the choices that I've made have been necessarily the wrong ones. Life's more nuanced than that. There is no black and white. This would, if you had done A instead of B, this series of events would have happened. Everything just takes you to where you are, makes you the person that you are.
And the second question is, can you tell us about a sliding door moment for you?
I suppose the biggest kind of influence in my life and career was that I had decided that I wanted to be a stop motion animator. I was working in stop motion. And then from the kind of, I was working in stop motion as a production assistant. And through that kind of logistical necessity of what employment is and how I needed to earn money, I ended up looking for jobs. And that job that I ended up with took me into Discovery and took me into the world of on-air creative. So yeah, if I hadn't seen that particular job advert and ended up in that particular job interview, things could have been really different.
Well, thanks again for coming in, Emma, and having a conversation with us about your career journey. It's been really interesting hearing about the transitions, how you made the move into teaching and also into pottery. And I'm so pleased that you're doing something that you've always wanted to, and it's going so well for you.
Thanks so much, Kabir.
You've been listening to Creative Moves, Left Career, Right Path, a Cabbage and Bubble TV co-production. Host, Kabir Malik. Producers, Pauline Russell and Kabir Malik. Special thanks to Emma Puddick. Follow us on Instagram at Creative Moves. Subscribe to Creative Moves on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, or wherever you get your podcasts.